Hi everyone, my name is Bill Mathews. I'm from the UK. I'm a freelance test consultant and I have been for since about 98. Been involved with testing since about 94 and like many people sort of stumbled into it and have been there ever since, and I'm very passionate about testing. This is my first cast and first talking at a main conference. So the topic of this is myth busting. What I found in my career as a test manager is you always have that section in your test plan which is assumptions, and assumptions are quite weird things because they are move on to the slide. Assumptions are quite weird because they are things that we believe to be true but we don't actually have any firm evidence that they are true, because if we had evidence they wouldn't be assumptions, and in some ways we actually just hope that they're going to be true, because if they're true then it makes our life a little bit easier. And from a testing perspective, they are part of our context because they can drive how we test and what approach we take, what tactics we take, and what strategies we use. And because of that, we really need to make sure that we challenge these assumptions. Because in my opinion, and in my experience, I generally find if things go wrong in testing, it's because of our assumptions that we've made quite early on. One of the other things that I do apart from testing is a study of Neuro-Linguistic programming, NLP. Anyone familiar with it or not familiar with it? It's a collection, or it's an attitude of how communication works, and it has various useful and interesting models about how people communicate, how people interpret the world around them. One of the key things is, I think it's actually Noam Chomsky said, the map is not the territory. So my map of the world is very different from your map of the world. So when I say, or when you say, this is going to be difficult to test, I don't actually know what you mean by it's going to be difficult. I know what I know is difficult to test, but it may not be the same. And assumptions, I find, are linked in with that. People make statements that they believe are true, and I look at those statements and think, actually, I'm not sure I agree with you. But I may actually agree with you once I understand what your perception is. And with assumptions, people have to form these assumptions in some way. And in the 1950s, a mathematician called George Polyer studied the idea of how do people come up with beliefs. And he came up with this idea of patterns of plausible inference. And he came up with it, there's 5 listed here. The first one is probability. The more often we see something happen or we recognise a pattern, the more we believe that that is the pattern, even if it's not actually a pattern. It could be very random. So I get comments like, we've never had any problems in previous releases, so we don't need to do much testing on this one. Verification of a consequence. This is where we have a consequence of our belief, and if we can prove that consequence, then we make the belief is more plausible. So stable software means we don't find many bugs in testing. If we're not finding many bugs in testing, then we must have a stable product. Now, some of you are probably sitting there thinking, that's just stupid logic, but this is how people form beliefs. Contingency. This is where if a belief is contingent on an event or a phenomenon, and we can see and we can verify that's happened, then it makes our belief more plausible, or assumption. So again, it's a stable product because we don't have any bugs in production. It may well be a stable product, but that's not necessarily the cause of why we need to do minimal amount of testing. Inference from analogy. I see this one a lot. People start coming up with, it's just a bit like this. In fact, there was a project I was on recently. We were taking data from one bank. We were replacing that with data from another bank, and somebody said, it's just like when you change your electricity provider or your gas provider. It's just, we cut that stream off and we take data in from there. And they just assume that that is how testing, it's an analogy, and that is how it's going to work. The last one we've got here is disproving the converse. Now, if we've got a stable product, we won't have any bugs in production. And therefore, the converse of that is, if it wasn't a stable product, we'd find more bugs in testing. And if we're not finding bugs in testing, then we must have a stable product. And again, none of this, when you look at it, you think, we're testers, we understand that things are different. But many people do think that this is the way that things work. Project I was on we talked about, very early on in the project, the remit came from the project itself, the project manager and the sponsor. We only need minimal testing on this product. And this is before we've actually looked at what the change is, anything like that. It is right before we've... Normally you get that bit right at the end, what's the minimum amount of testing we can do because we're running out of time. We were 9 months before the end of testing. We hadn't even started execution. I'm very lucky in that I get a long time to plan testing and next to no time to actually execute testing. And when I started asking people, how do you know we only need minimal testing? And the question, how do you know, is a very pertinent one when you talk about assumptions. Because what I'm asking for is, what is your evidence? And they came back with one, which was, it's just like changing your gas supplier. Another one is, it was a very stable product in the past. Why do we need to do more testing? This is before we've started analysis. And as I say, we have to make sure these beliefs are robust. And one of the other tools that I get from NLP is a thing called the Metamodel. And the Metamodel is by Bandler and Grinder, who are co-founders of NLP. And they come up with a model of communication. And this is only part of that model of communication. What it gives you is a way of understanding how people talk about things and coming up with challenge questions to try and explore that. So the first one, mind reading, the one where people say, you should have known that you had to test that. And the challenge questions are things like, well, how would I know? Did someone tell me? But people just assume that you know that you should do that. Loss performative, this is where the source of this has not been recognised. So obviously we're doing best practices, but actually, says who? Where's our evidence that this is a best practice for us? Universal quantifier, this is whenever people come out with statements that say always, never. So things like, we never find bugs in her code, therefore we don't need to do much testing there. It's low risk. Modal operators, can't, should, must. Nominalizations, this is where we have a verb, like testing. We test is a verb, it's a doing activity, but people make it into a noun. Testing is a thing that you can put on your table and look at. Testing is going badly. Testing is not going badly because testing isn't an object, it's an activity. Where we see assumptions come in are cause and effect and complex equivalence. This is where we have a cause and effect, and we either make a direct link or an indirect link. Comparative deletions are things like when people say best practice, he's better than her, she's better than him. There's no level of granularity between what they're talking about. What I use the Metamodel for is two parts. One is to fill in the blanks. When I start hearing people saying things like, he should know how to test, I'm almost immediately challenging that. How would he know? How would they know to do that testing? If people start saying, we don't have enough time to do testing, how do you know we don't have time to do testing? What testing are we talking about doing? How long will it take? And in addition to allowing you to explore what people are saying about when they make these statements, the Metamodel also allows you to formulate questions which can help to challenge their belief. And that's what I try to do when I'm looking at assumptions, is asking the questions that are pertinent to the statements they're making. So it's a small change, we don't have to test much. How do you know it's a small change? What is a small change to you? Is it one function? Is it 10 functions? It's a lot more to me. And what I'm trying to do is to understand what is their model of the world. When they make that statement, what are they actually telling me that I need to know? And the Metamodel, like I say, it allows you to explore what they're saying, but also challenge what they're saying. Wikipedia is a very good source for finding out more about the Metamodel, with lots of examples of how this is structured and how they interlink. When I can't change someone's opinion using the Metamodel, I pull out something that is it's like a bigger gun, and it's called the sleight of mouth patterns. Sleight of mouth is there's a lot more than just these 5 items here. There's about 16 of them. Sleight of mouths are ways of talking to people to change their mind. It's different from persuasion. Persuasion is where I'm trying to force you to do something you might not want to do. What I'm actually doing is trying to make you see a different perspective. And in many ways, I'm asking you to see it from my perspective. So, one of the questions I had on this recent project was, about its stability of the product. We don't find many bugs in testing, therefore it's a stable product. So the very first one here is a sleight of mouth pattern, which is offer a different outcome. And one way you can say that is, well, perhaps we don't find many bugs in our testing because our testing is too minimal. We're not doing enough testing to find bugs. We can also look at the consequence of their assumption, if they're making an assumption. And in this case, what if the package is built incorrectly? That could impact on all our customers, not just the ones who are using the new feature. How does that make you feel? Does it make you change your assumptions that you're making about the system or the solution? Reality strategy. This is similar to the offer a different outcome, but you're saying, well, perhaps we don't have many live defects because we don't do a lot of testing. The metaphor and analogy. The analogy that I said earlier about this is it's just like changing your gas supplier. The way I tackled that one was saying, well, actually, yes, I agree. It is like changing your gas supplier, except it's not just unplugging one and putting another one in. It's like ripping up your driveway, laying some new cables, building an extension on your house to feed all the new gubbins in there, and then about 6 months later we have to dig up your lawn to take out the old stuff. And in particular on that one, that worked really, really well, because they suddenly went, oh, you mean it's more complex than I actually think it was. So the sleight of mouth patterns are very good when you're in a stuck position. You can't actually talk to somebody and they're not actually seeing what you're saying. By using a sleight of mouth pattern, you can actually change conversationally how they believe or their belief system. Another powerful one is the redirect or redefine. And it's quite a long one there. Often people get very stuck in their own ways about, this is the problem, this is the issue. We should be talking about saving money for testing. We should be doing minimal amount of testing always. And a redirect or redefine allows you to say, yeah, I agree with what you're saying there. It's, in principle, I understand where you're coming from. However, that's not the issue we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on this big issue up here. So in the case of, we should be doing minimal testing because we think it's a stable product. My response to that was, yeah, it's not really about how much or how little testing we do. It's about whether we can help our stakeholders make those decisions. And really what we should be focusing on is understanding what do they need to know to get to making those decisions. So NLP, although it's if you ever look at NLP stuff, a lot of it's in therapy. So it's all about therapeutic, helping people, career management and stuff like that, goals, but also helping people with phobias and that sort of thing. It can and it is used a lot in business. And although NLP talks about these as their own techniques, they're actually techniques that they've observed by watching other people. A bit like James was saying earlier, he doesn't actually invent these things, he just observes them and looks at them and understands where they come from and then gives them a name and then he claims that it's his own. NLP is the same. They pick up little things from lots of different places and go, oh, that looks interesting, and they start applying it. But because it's all driven by different models of communication, different models of motivation, they can be taught to people. So learning things like the Metamodel allows you to be much better at talking to people, understanding what their point of view is. Sleight of mouth, it makes you much better at communicating with people and changing their opinions of things. And I think that is my last slide. Yep. So, any questions?
Perfect. Good. All right, open season.
Just get some water. Wow.
Don't be shy. Goodness.
Either I've put you all to sleep, or I've answered every question everybody's got.
All right.
So can you give me an example of where you've used this in a real work scenario?
The ones I was telling you about is a real scenario. The project was for a large bank in the UK. I think it was my second day on the project. The project manager came to me and said, Bill, we don't need a lot of testing on this. In fact, we want minimal testing. Now, normally it's like, how much testing can you squeeze into 2 weeks? Rather than what's the minimum amount of testing we can do. And as I said, this is months before we actually got to the point where we're actually like, we haven't got enough time to do the testing. So, and that really surprised me because normally I don't get that sort of, let's do the minimal amount of testing. They normally trust you to do, say, this is the appropriate level of testing. And using these techniques, the Metamodel in particular, was able to drill down and sort of say, well, how do you know we need minimal amount of testing? And what came out of that was, well, it's a stable product. And in the large it was. It had been sitting there for 10 years, on and off, very small upgrades, worked fine, never had any production problems. The other one was, the gas supplier change thing. They saw the change in what we were doing was as simple as changing your gas or electricity supplier. But drilling into that, you start to understand that actually it's a lot more than that. The reason that the product is stable is because we didn't really change it. It was small typo changes, it was very small functionality. What this project was doing was adding a whole new suite of screens into this solution, which, given that this was a solution that was used in the front line of all the banks, if we got the testing wrong, we'd be affecting pretty much all our customers until we fixed it. So it was quite high priority. But they just saw it as a very small, we don't need to do much testing here, it's a little bit of testing. Sleight of mouth, as I say, if you're dealing with people who are very set in their mindset about what they do, all you're doing here is offering them a different outcome. And when they start seeing different outcomes, they say, oh, yeah, yeah, I understand where you're coming from now. You've told me where you're coming from, I'm telling you where I'm coming from. Which one do you prefer? Which reality do you prefer best, mine or yours? And quite often it does change their minds. Not always successful. And you have to use some of these things with care, because you don't want to be the person who just sort of, is always trying to get their own way. Because some of them can be quite powerful. And you can use it in lots of different situations.
Okay, same thread, 88.
So I was curious, you just sort of alluded to it, you're not always successful with those methods. What
No.
happens in those situations?
You try something different. It's...
Have there ever been times when you've actually lost the argument? You don't need to do much testing, and yes, you're just going to have to deal with less testing.
I mean, that in this particular instance, no. We actually sort of bumped it up to, we need to focus on what the stakeholders want, not what the testers want, or not what the project manager wants. Because you've got these two types of stakeholders. You've got your project stakeholder who's trying to cut costs and get the project delivered on time, and then you've got your business stakeholders who are actually the ones that want the solution in place, and they want a good solution in place. So quite often, if you're dealing with somebody and it's not working, you can get backup from other areas using similar techniques to make sure that you understand where they're coming from. It just gives you that head of momentum to allow you to make people's decisions to change their minds. Like I say, it doesn't always work, but then nothing ever does. If it does, I'd be making a lot of money out of this.
Okay, new thread, 29.
If you're interested in another way of looking at communication and interpersonal relationships that also happens to come out of therapy, look into the work of Virginia Satir.
Yep. Sorry, I haven't been repeating the question, but you mentioned the work of Virginia Satir. Virginia Satir's work is actually incorporated a lot into NLP. Right at the very start of NLP, Bandler and Grinder, they went off looking at various therapists, including Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, Milton Erickson, and the Metamodel comes from studying those people and modelling how they communicate. Yes, I'd certainly recommend Virginia Satir's work. Any more?
Oh, come on, we've got 2.5 minutes left.
I can cure phobias. Anybody, or if you want a phobia. All right. Thank you very much.